want to give you an overview of the course in terms of what we'll be reading. As you can see, there is also a practical course tour that I sent out. You'll also find it hopefully, in the introductory module of the Canvas site. Please take a look at that. Look at that carefully. Basically outlines how the course is arranged in terms of the Canvas site and also what the requirements for the course are. So if you have any questions about that, please hold them until after you actually watch the practical course tour. This is a thematic course overview in which I actually talk about the kind of things that we'll be reading. There's not a lot to say, I should say, about that. That is, this course is called Intellectual Heritage 52, The Common Good. And that thing about the common good is really understood pretty loosely, in the sense that IH52, unlike IH51, you could call it the non-fiction course. You could call it the course that takes on history, politics, social issues to some degree. And that would be the only initial theme that would draw together these texts. The idea is, and I should say, is that we'll make connections between these texts as we go along. They'll be part of your work for the course. There are plenty of connections. There always are in between good books, at least, and these are good books. There are always connections. There are always ideas that relate to each other. So, what are we reading? We're reading Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which is a set of essays that she wrote in the 1920s on the general subject of women and fiction. And really, what it turned out to be is a set of essays on what it means to be a woman writer and the particular obstacles that are faced by women writers. Probably, in my mind, some of the greatest nonfiction written in the 20th century. I would say that Woolf's A Room of One's Own is a milestone, not only in feminist writing. I mean, of course, it's feminist, but I think that its significance is just that it's really, really good literary theory and really good social commentary. You learn a lot from reading Virginia Woolf. We'll follow that up then with James Baldwin. Um, just so we're all clear from the practical course tour, if you click on these links, you'll find the texts. Here's Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I encourage you to buy yourself your own copy, but here it is if you want to read one online. And here is the edition of Baldwin's essays that I'm using, also from archive.org. James Baldwin, again, I'm trying to think of a better essayist in the English language, which is the only language I read. And I can't. In terms of the 20th century, at least, I can't. Baldwin was a masterful writer. He was a masterful essayist. He is also known for writing novels and I think at least one play. And probably would have considered himself primarily a novelist. But I think as history moves on and as we gain a more measured, perhaps, appreciation of Baldwin as a writer, I think it's his essays that stand out as the landmark achievement. But of course, that's a matter of taste. We'll be reading several essays by James Baldwin. The fact that he's black is, of course, an important part of him and his writing, as you'll see. African American. But he's just a great writer, and you'll learn a lot, not only about the black experience in America, whether you're black or not, but also just about the human condition. Like Woolf, Woolf is a female writer. She's a woman writer, but her abilities as a writer and her profundity as a writer transcend any kind of categories. I would say the exact same thing about James Baldwin. You will learn tremendous amount by reading James Baldwin, who was one of the great American writers. There's just no question about it. Those are the two books that I would say I know the most about. Some of these things I'm still familiarizing myself with. For example, the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, which is, I think, 11th century. Japan. That is, Sei Shonagon was a aristocratic Japanese woman from, I think, the 1000s, the 11th century in Japan. Don't quote me on that even. And it's new territory for me. I really look forward to talking about it with you, but I don't know a lot about it. I don't want to mislead you. I'm still reading it. It's one of the classics of world literature, and it's from medieval Japan, and it's going to be a wonderful experience. Gloria Anzaldúa is an American writer. I think she published Borderlands in the 1980s, and I have taught and read Borderlands a couple times before, I think. It's a fascinating book. It's a book about living or emerging or defining yourself by being a person from the borderlands. She's literally from the borderlands, the border between Mexico and the United States and Texas. And she's culturally on the borderlands. She's bilingual, as we'll see. She speaks two major languages, and she speaks a dialect of one of them, or Spanish. And part of the book is in Spanish as well as in English. Most of it's in English, but some of it's in Spanish. And she's in the borderlands in another way too, because she's kind of still coming to terms. You've got to remember she grew up in Texas in a very conservative community in like the 1950s, and she's a lesbian. So she's an academic and intellectual. So she doesn't feel quite at home anywhere, I suppose. Although she has very deep connections with different communities. Fascinating book. We're going to read T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom in excerpts. We're going to read excerpts from the Pillow Book and Borderlands too. We'll read them in their entirety. And Baldwin's collected essays, we'll see. We're only going to read 6 or 7 essays out of dozens that he's written. But Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom is a tremendous book. It's an account of the Arab Revolt, the so-called Arab Revolt during World War I. T.E. Lawrence was a British intelligence officer who was key in leading the some of the Arab tribes against the Turkish Empire during World War One, and it is a tremendous book not only of history and ethnography but of philosophy, and it is quite an interesting book. I think that it may be regarded as being an outmoded book because it's colonialist. It might even be regarded as racist. I don't think it is racist, but I think that some of the things that he says are indefensible. But I think obviously it's still much worth reading. We don't have to agree with it, but I think you can learn a lot from reading Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom. Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, again, not a book that I'm incredibly familiar with. I'm reading it now, getting my thoughts together on it now. I don't have much to say about it except that it's about plants and indigenous American wisdom. And finally, Confucius's Analects, tremendously important, maybe one of the most important books in history, because it's the basis of Confucianism, which is essentially the basis, as I understand it, of Chinese culture. So, full disclosure, when you are assigned to teach IH 52, there are 4 books that you are assigned as being required text, and then you can add any 3. The required texts, that is the books I said, well, you've got to teach these 4, are the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, Gloria Anzaldúa's Borderlands, Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and Confucius's Analects. The 3 books that I chose were Wolf's A Room of One's Own, Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, and the collected essays of James Baldwin. We are only going to read, we're not going to read any single book of Baldwin's, but we're going to jump across various collections that he published in his lifetime, and they were published after his death in a collected essays form. So, what is the course about? I take an experimental approach to intellectual heritage. Intellectual heritage is going through a period where it is experimenting with different books. You are part of a pilot program that's been going on for the past year where people experiment with different books, and the powers that be at IH are kind of deciding which books will sort of constitute the new IH. IH, of course, being a two-semester course, this being the sort of, as I said, IH 52 is kind of the nonfiction one. So it is experimental, and I have, in the spirit of that, I've been trying to be experimental and pushing boundaries in the kind of books that I choose. I think that the really experimental one here for me is T. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom. It's a book that I love, but it's not a book that I've ever taught before, and I hesitate because of various aspects of it to give it to you. But I think that we should be experimenting with different things to read, and this is an experiment. As far as the Wolves, The Room of One's Own, it's a masterpiece. I think that it should be read by everyone. I think that it should be a required text in age 52. And as far as reading essays by James Baldwin, I think that, again, that should probably be. I'm very confident that that would make a great choice in any course that has to do with philosophy or social commentary, history, politics, American culture, especially. So it's going to be an interesting course, and I think that the quality of this course, and I've taught it many times in a student's education, it depends almost entirely on the amount of effort and interest that the student is willing to show. You've got to do the readings. You've got to familiarize yourself with the readings. You've got to spend time doing them. They're wonderful books. They are great books. Maybe not all of them are great, and maybe not all of them will be to your taste, but there'll be something, and more than something, several things that you'll read for this course that, if you put the effort in, will become meaningful parts of your education and therefore your lives. So yeah, that's as far as the theme of the course, it's the idea that we're reading texts that are really interesting and important, and we're making connections between them. I'm not going to tell you what those connections are necessarily. I want you to come up with that on your own. So it should be a very interesting course. I always enjoy myself personally teaching intellectual heritage.